views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
I'm Nora Thomas, reporter and anchor at WFUV. That's the NPR affiliate station based on the Rose Hill campus of Fordham University in the Bronx. And this is Bronx Connections, a joint initiative between WFUV and BronxNet to provide thoughtful and insightful coverage of the borough. In this episode, we're going to hear about cultural equity as it relates to art. One of our reporters, Eliot Schiaparelli, spoke with representatives from the Bronx Council on the Arts. And later on, we'll be talking with Roseanna Gulisano, a librarian at PS11 in Highbridge, about her efforts to secure books and other essential resources for her elementary school students hit hard by the COVID-19 outbreak. The Bronx Council on the Arts works to celebrate Bronx culture and its artists through programs, grants, and projects. Bronx Connections' Eliot Schiaparelli spoke with Executive Director Vivianna Bianchi and Director of Grants and Programs Bryan. They explained the Council's role in facilitating arts and programs and distributing funding within the borough. Here's Eliot's interview.
Vivianna and Bryan, thank you so much for joining me. I want to start by asking you to tell me a little bit about Bronx Council on the Arts, just an overview. What's your mission and what do you guys do day to day?
Well, BCA has been in the community since 1962. We were and are one of the pioneers for equity in the borough. One of the first ones who advocated for support for artists in the Bronx. We've grown a lot since that time, and over the last 2 years, we have tried to reshape BCA and the programs that we offer to better serve the needs of the borough. And so we offer programs that we say connect and provide resources, and we also advocate for the right of artists and arts organizations. Within the connector programs, we have the Longwood Art Gallery or the Longwood Arts Project, of which the Longwood Art Gallery is part, where we do 3 exhibitions a year and 1 with the college. And obviously we serve underrepresented groups, particularly artists of color, LGBTQA community, women. And we've always working in the intersection of arts and social change. So our exhibitions usually follow an arch of a theme, and then there are, different sub-themes within that. Within the resource program, of course, the grants is one of the ones that we are known the most for. We have 3 community engagement grants and 1 Brio Award for artistic excellence. And then on the advocacy, we recently created some cultural assets mapping project that we're working on in order to see how gentrification and development is going to impact the arts in the Bronx.
Great. And can you guys tell me, why is it so important to have sustained access to the arts in the Bronx, in this borough, and have you guys here to facilitate that?
There are those of us who work in the arts and know that arts is sort of an essential part of life, right? Life and culture in the arts. So I think, I think specifically, the Bronx is a very large and diverse borough. And our role is to support arts and culture in the borough. So the importance of us being here is to, one of our primary roles, and this is, in terms of grant making, is to sort of be a local source for state and city funds to be distributed to local artists and arts organizations here in the borough. So it's a very important role because the way I like to say it is your tax dollars coming back to you through the form of arts funding. And it's very important that's why we try to reach as many parts of the borough as we can, always looking for new people to become aware of our programs, to support with our grants and our workshops. And we do some public programming as well, so what we hope to do is to provide a way that Bronx artists, Bronx creatives can both express themselves through culture and the arts, as well as share that with their fellow Bronxites.
So Bryan, you help run a lot of those grant programs. Can you tell me a little bit more about them and the difference they make?
Sure. So we fund some community engagement grants, and then we fund BRIO, which is Bronx Recognize Its Own, which is a unique award in the city, which we're very proud of. Basically, our grants are available to local artists and arts organizations. They're smaller grants, usually the maximum is $5,000. They're really designed, the community engagement grants are designed for activities that engage the community in some way in the arts, either through teaching or performance or something like that. And our Bronx Recognize Its Own award is unique. It's, I think, 31 or 32 years old now. And we've supported well over 500 artists with over $1.7 million over the past 30 years.
Through our grants program, we served last year indirectly 53,000 people in the Bronx. So the importance of the grants is, amazing. Also, because we are hyper local, we are really basically delegates from the Department of Cultural Affairs and the New York State Council on the Arts to re-grant these funds. And the reason they trust us for so many years is that we know the communities very well and make a specific effort to every year expand our outreach.
Yeah. So the Bronx Memoir project, that is something you guys facilitate directly, correct?
Yes.
So can you tell me a little bit more about that and why it's important?
Yeah, the Bronx Memoir project, okay, I was thinking today how old it is, and it's older than what Bryan and I have been at BCA. So we've been here for 3 years now, but I think that predates us at least 3 more years. The Bronx Memoir project is important because even though it's tailored for professional and avocational writers, it really forms community, the community of writers where everyone participates, learns, and they are part of this group of people who come together to share the stories of the Bronx. We think it's important to capture a history of the Bronx from the participants themselves and how they perceive that. So in terms of a structure, we offer 3 series of 4 workshops each where participants can register, they can attend 3, 4, 1 or 2, whatever. And then they submit a piece of writing that goes into an anthology that gets published at the end of the program year.
Participants tell their own stories about growing up in the Bronx or their experiences in the Bronx.
Yeah, all kinds of stories. That's the exciting thing. And I think that's why this project is special, because they're coming to learn to write to some extent. Some of them are professional writers and they're coming to just be in workshop around writing. But the thing that's unique about Bronx Memoir is that it's memoir, right? So it's personal stories. And what was great this year is we did something a little bit different. We had formats. So we had narrative, we had poetry, and we had, I think, essay writing. And so the participants could express themselves in a different form.
There's been so much political activism recently. And when people are protesting and trying to make a difference in the Bronx and in the world, what do you see your role being? And then what do you see the role of art being?
In general, I can say that BCA tries to work in the intersection of social justice and art. So a lot of not only in our DNA, we are here to support the work of underrepresented populations, as I mentioned earlier. The work that we exhibit in the gallery has a very strong social justice component. Recently, we did an exhibition called The Update that was for young artists of color under 30, and where they were reflecting on how Bronx culture impacts them. And it is in itself a political statement, if you wish. we have had last year was all on immigration.
I'll add also, I mean, in addition to, our social justice arts intersection or perspective, I mean, just practically speaking now in this moment, we were fortunate to be able to, after much concern and uncertainty, we got clarity around our ability to, actually release our grant funds, receive and release our grant funds to artists.
And we didn't mention the artist residency programs, which we've been trying to do, which is launch our first year of 3 residencies where we like to, we have an open call and we place artists in community-based organizations so that through art they can, better their lives.
Are there any other programs or upcoming events that we haven't mentioned that have to do with anything we've talked about?
You caught us right at the end of our fiscal year. So in a way, we're just now starting to plan for next year, but we were talking recently with staff that we foresee a lot more activist art coming in through the doors next year, and that we obviously open to embrace that. So as we plan for next year, things are changing moment to moment. But for example, last year we started incorporating street art, which VCA did not have last year for our category on the Brio. So we will be looking at what other types of things we can do that also incorporates this moment. Maybe because we use social change or social justice art as protest art in our head kind of works as one thing. So we are open, obviously, to do that, but yeah, to support that as well.
Great. Thank you guys so much. I really appreciate your talking to me about all of this.
That was Vivianna, Bianchi, and Bryan Glover from the Bronx Council on the Arts. Now, how one librarian has teamed up with Broadway to provide books and other resources to families in Highbridge. Roseanna Gulisano has been at PS11 for 17 years. She says families at her school struggle to access reading materials in comfortable learning environments without a global pandemic. Since school moved online in March, Gulisano has had to transform physical libraries into mobile delivery sites. But she says, however scary COVID-19 has been, it sparked communal compassion in ways she's never seen before. Here's the interview.
I'm privileged to be the librarian of PS11, the Highbridge School in the Bronx, which is located in the Bronx on Ogden Avenue. And as the librarian, I serve the highest need area, the most underserved community in the country. 530 plus students I see on a weekly basis from pre-K to 5th grade. And I have 2 libraries that I funded myself through grants, etc., so that our children can have a pre-K to 1st grade library, where I do puppets, etc., story time, and a 2nd to 5th grade library, both which I am part of the New York, My Library NYC, so I have access to every book in the community and in the city for our New York Public Library system.
I think by now a lot of us have a sense of how remote learning had been going on, because the school year is over by now. Can you talk a little bit about what the transition to remote library time was like?
The most shocking really was the fact that I couldn't see the children's faces. I mean, normally, as you can imagine, with library time and reading time, you have the students there, you're doing a lesson, teaching vocabulary, and you can have a read. You can see how the students, if they're comprehending or not. Well, with remote learning, all of a sudden we were plummeted into now I'm on the phone or I'm doing an online class, but started off calling all the families. And what we found right away were the children very hard to pay attention, very hard to get in touch with them. And of course, the families were let's just say their struggles had multiplied overnight by tenfold. And the first thing was that I noticed that the families were food compromised. Many of the families, before they could even talk to me about how we can conduct lessons in learning and reading and vocabulary, they were wondering if they were going to be able to feed their children and their families, where they were going to live. Do they have to move? Many of our families are shelter families, so they had to move from shelter to shelter for safety reasons. So I had to look at, now what do I need to do to make sure that, can I get them food? Can I get them books? And so that was my next step right away.
Can you tell me a little bit about how you went about securing those resources?
I reached out to the Broadway community, who have been really a stronghold to support us in every way, from clothing to books to resources in every way. And right away, they supplied me groceries and books. We had a mother who needed, one example, diapers, and these things that the families needed in order to survive. And at first, I started to mail things, that was hard too. Who was not moving? How could I get an address that they were actually going to be getting when I mailed? So I started doing that for about a week or two. And then I noticed that, I would mail it and then the family would move, or the person who was going to accept the mail, they didn't want to go out, of course. So we got together, many of us. Lynn Pinto, one of the musical producers on Broadway, who has been a godsend to our community. She picked me up. We loaded up a couple vans. We got together, and the first time we went into the community, and we've been going on a regular basis about every 2 weeks. But the first time we went in, I must say, I never saw anything like it. I had not been out of my house, and then going into that area, hitting Ogden Avenue in the Bronx, there were lines around the block for families that needed resources, food.
So books have gone alongside with food in these.
Yes, at first, I must say, we didn't focus on books at first. But then I'm hearing from the families, like, they don't have the book. Yes, they can get everything online, all that, but you need a lot of computers to do that. Some of the families are not speaking, they're not reading as much. The children need to read so much more, and they're really falling behind. So my idea, which I have created a diversity book drive, which I may have mentioned, again, through the Broadway community. Christine Nye, who is one of the stage managers of Wicked, and I, and Lynn Pinto, we put together a diversity book drive so that everyone can donate, and we have raised enough to give books to every student, 500, that was our goal, that every child, every student at the Highbridge PS11 would receive a book on diversity. Now, this seems like a simple matter, but one of the reasons our children are not getting enough out of reading is because they're not seeing themselves represented in the books. They don't see their faces. They don't, see families like them. They don't see a mirror of themselves. Or they don't have a window to the world. So these books are to teach many lessons, moral lessons, empathy. What does that mean? What is injustice? Different types of injustices.
How does this look different specifically for the summer school season?
Our community is focused on a lot more things than reading and math and learning over the summer. number one, it looks different because we don't have the space. You know, our space now is very compromised. We can't let in as many students. Those students that were selected are the ones that need it most, instead of many levels of reading, many reading levels. We had to just go to those students who needed it most, and they're invited to come in to be, you know, very safe distance learning. That is a combination of blended learning where they get in-person instruction certain days, certain times, and they have access to virtual instruction. And that it's just starting out, and that based on what we find from that, how does that shape our September? We don't know yet. I mean, there's so many things that we're looking at, but it's going to be a combination. As far as the materials go, see, that's another thing. You know, we can't assume in our community that our children have all the materials at home, the building blocks they need to make, you know, a math project, or we can't assume that.
We were talking about with the book drive and providing food for the community. To what extent has that been you capitalizing on your own connections with the Broadway community, and to what extent are you utilizing city resources or resources from PS11 itself?
It's solely my resources, meaning, you know, it takes a village. It takes a village. This is so huge. The big deep hole that was needed before, I can't even measure what that is now. So what I was reaching out for before, now it's like both of my arms are reaching out, really. The Broadway community has been incredible. Ioana Alfonso, a producer and an actor on Broadway, you know, she has consistently provided coats, clothing. They have, as you know, done the most beautiful, wonderful world video for our students who graduated, because we had to have a video of our virtual graduation. We didn't have anything without Broadway. They really came through. As far as the city goes, you know, now, I mean, I'm even in more competition with for resources.
To be clear, you say you're competing with other schools for these resources. Does it feel like you're competing with other underserved communities?
Yes. You know, when you have a grant, like right now, for example, there's grants that I'm looking at that are offered to, if you are qualified, and many schools do. You know, how many do you have in the shelters? How, you know, these things. What are the poverty levels? You know, how Title I, meaning, you know, all our complete school is free lunches. You know, I mean, now it's probably 100%. It was 90-some% before. Meaning all poverty, it's all poverty level. And there are other schools and other communities that when they see a grant like that, which is one grant for one amount of money for, you know, different things, books is what I'm going for a lot of, they're all going to write that grant. So, you know, any exposure, like now I can say, if I know, like when I see who's going to be deciding on that grant. So I get relationships with those people so they can be aware of what our needs really are. You know, it used to be where we were in competition before anyway, but I can't even, again, we can't even measure now what that really means. All I know is our kids are hungry. How much understanding and reading can you learn if you're hungry? You know, it's just, it's impossible. I know for me, right? I mean, when you're hungry. So I'm looking at the grant, I'm looking at what we qualify for. and there's a couple things I'm highly considering, and we'll see what happens with them.
What are you most apprehensive about looking toward the fall?
The only thing I care about is the love of reading, is getting reading into the heart of our children, because that's their future. No matter what kind of job, no matter what they're interested in life, if they don't know how to read and they don't really feel a love of reading, they can't even fill out the application. So my most apprehensive was I can't see those students eye to eye.
We're obviously facing just a very changed world, and the city as a whole, and the country and in the world we're all navigating a lot of changes right now. Is there anything you feel kind of optimistic about?
I feel optimistic about everything. What I've seen as far as compassionate acts, one-on-one compassionate acts. I'm not talking about some organization. I'm talking about people that work all over this city that have come through giving from they're reaching in their own pockets. I feel tremendous hope. I feel tremendous confidence. This happening put a light on what it did is it made people really look at what is meaningful in life, whoever they are. And I have seen proof of compassion, kindness, generosity that I never dreamed of. Everything that comes to me goes right directly into the hands of the community and the families. And I have great hope and belief that it's a better world. I really do. I know it.
And last thing, can you give a little description of what the graduation video is to someone who might not be familiar?
Yes, it was called Highbridge Wonderful World. And another example of high compassionate acts. Many of the top performers on Broadway, Iwana Alfonso was the producer, so she really was the one that got it together. When I heard we had to create some kind of virtual celebration for our graduates, you know, we never did this before, as many other schools didn't. And one of the teachers said, you know, Miss Gulisano, I heard that, you know, Oprah Winfrey or so-and-so is doing this. And I go, okay, well, let me just put it out there. Never dreaming. They created a 10-minute heartfelt messages about their lives. Many of them came from very difficult home lives, and never give up. The message in a beautiful song, and again, meaningful love was never give up, always do your best, no matter where you come from. And this was what we showed the students and the families. And, you know, everyone was sobbing. Another example of, you know, watch what you wish for, because it really ignited so much compassion from the Broadway community, who said that they were honored to do it because they wanted to do something in response to all of the social unrest, that they couldn't live with themselves without taking action. And this Wonderful World, Highbridge Wonderful World video is proof that they took action.
Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Take care and enjoy the slightly cooler day. Thanks to Bronx Connections, Eliot Schiaparelli, Roseanna Gulisano from PS11, and the Bronx Council on the Arts. That's it for this episode of Bronx Connections. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Nora Thomas. See you next time.